ever thought if it's possible to explain why you develop certain musical preferences? Have you ever wondered which are the factors that are related to these preferences? But what are exactly these musical preferences? These three questions are at the core of this course and will guide its learning objectives. Thus, at the end of this course, you will be able to: firstly, make the distinction between musical preferences and taste in music. Secondly, learn about the factors related to music, the listener, and the context which have been investigated in relation to musical preferences. Though most of us know intuitively what we mean by musical preferences, three researchers, Hargreaves, North, and Tarrant, made the following distinction between musical preference, which is considered to be a person's liking for one piece of music as compared with another at a given point in time, and taste in music, which reflects the overall patterning of an individual's preferences over longer time periods. Thus, the two constructs can be distinguished in relation to a time frame and a more generalized or specific categorization. So, if, for example, we say we like Queen when answering someone's question in a particular moment, we express our musical preference. But if we say something like, I've been listening to rock music ever since adolescence, then we would describe our taste in music. They influence each other in a reciprocal feedback. However, musical preferences can be measured at different levels, ranging from using broad style categories, for example, reflective and intense, or by identifying specific artists or tracks. Now that we made the distinction between musical preferences and taste in music, we will move forward and learn about three types of factors which are reflected in the scientific literature regarding musical preferences. Firstly, specific musical characteristics that influence our preferences. Secondly, factors related to the listener which influence musical preferences. And thirdly, factors related to the social context which impact musical preferences. Let's see what we know about specific musical characteristics that influence preference. One of the first ways in which researchers tried to answer this question was to explore the underlying dimensions of musical preferences, more specifically to investigate how preference for different musical styles cluster together. One of the pioneers of this type of research is psychologist Peter Renfro. At first, his research team asked participants in their studies to rate their preferences for 14 styles. He observed the fact that their ratings were grouped in 4 main musical preference dimensions. These dimensions are reflective and complex, which include classical, jazz, blues, and folk. A second one is called intense and rebellious, which includes alternative, rock, and heavy metal. The third dimension is upbeat and conventional, which includes country, pop, religious, and soundtrack. And the fourth dimension is called energetic and rhythmic and includes rap, hip-hop, soul, funk, dance, and electronica. They specified the fact that each of these styles were characterized by specific patterns of attributes. If we take into account, for example, the intense and rebellious category, we can observe the fact that music is usually in fast tempo, moderate levels of complexity, usually has lower levels of positive effect, and higher levels of negative effect and energy. As years passed, Renfro extended this model and included more musical styles, such as punk, opera, reggae, or R&B, as well as more psychological characteristics, and developed a further model which is very easy to remember, for it contains the acronym MUSIC. Are you curious about which music styles, genres are in each category and what are their names? M comes from mellow and includes soft, rock, R&B, soul, and adult contemporary. U comes from unpretentious and includes new country, country rock, and rock and roll. S comes from sophisticated and of course includes classical music, opera, jazz and avant-garde classical. And I comes from intense and includes classic rock, heavy metal, rock and punk. And lastly, C comes from contemporary and includes rap, electronica and Latin. What would you observe in regards to these models? Do you believe they are limited in some ways? Well, more recent criticism of these models came from the fact that these approaches are rather reductionist, because they depend on the music styles and characteristics which are selected by the researchers. And they also assume that people's perceptions of these musical genres are the same. However, there is evidence that people have omnivorous preferences and some of them are interpreted in subjective ways. Some participants even mentioned 226 styles and substyles of music genres. And for sure, there is variation even within individuals with respect to some specific musical characteristics. E.g., lyrics are important when we consider one artist, but not at all important when we consider other artists or musical genre. However, such variety is very hard to measure, and these models, which can offer us some general view on how music characteristics influence our musical preferences, are welcomed. Now, have you wondered which individual characteristics are related to our musical preferences and how they are related? Before continuing, I'd like to make a very important observation. In the following section, we will talk about personality, age, gender, identity, and their relationship with our musical preferences. However, it's important to be aware of the fact that the association we present do not reflect causal relations. If we will see that there is a relationship between intense music styles, such as rock and heavy metal, and a negative attitude towards authority, it doesn't mean that the relationship is causal, that by listening to rock music it will automatically lead to this kind of attitude. When correlation is observed, the influence can be bidirectional or it can have other causal factors which determine us both to listen to rock music and to have negative attitudes towards authority. With this in mind, let's see what relationships have been observed. Of course, much work investigated relations between personality and musical preferences. In the reading material for this course, you will have the chance to read more about the Big Five personality model, which is one of the most researched models in this area of personality psychology. This model includes 5 dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And these dimensions were studied in relation to musical preferences. If we take into account the first model of musical preferences developed by Peter Renfro and his colleagues, the following relationships were observed. People with preference for reflective and complex styles, such as classical and jazz, have higher levels of openness to experience, self-perceived intelligence, and political liberalism, and lower levels of self-perceived athleticism. Also, for the rhythmic and energetic styles, such as dance, hip-hop, they were associated with extraversion, openness to experience, self-perceived athleticism, and negatively related to conservatism. When researchers used the music model, they observed the following associations. Preference for contemporary styles, such as rap and funk, were associated with higher levels of extraversion. Unpretentious styles, pop and country, with higher levels of agreeableness, and preference for intense styles was associated with lower level of conscientiousness. Also, an interesting finding is the fact that preference for heavy metal was associated with higher levels of openness to experience, a need for uniqueness, and a negative attitude towards authority. Gender differences were also observed. For example, women are more likely to pay attention to emotive aspects of music and to emphasize mood and emotion-related functions as being key factors in forging their preferences in music. Specific comparisons show women are more likely to prefer pop, country, religious, opera than men, and men are more likely to prefer rock, blues, jazz, reggae, and heavy metal. This, of course, does not mean that these music genres are exclusive for one gender, for we all know plenty of men who like country music and women who love rock, jazz, or heavy metal. The results we present here reflect general patterns and should be regarded as such. We all know those people who have always liked one musical genre and their entire life, and for sure there is a percentage of people who are rather stable in their musical preferences as they age. However, researchers did find that age can influence our musical preferences. If you wonder how, well, it seems that in a sample with age range from 18 to 60 years old, researchers North and Haygreaves found that younger participants are much more likely to listen to hip-hop, DJ-based music, dance house, R&B, indie, while older people listen to classical, 60s pop, musicals, and opera. Studies which track our preferences over longer periods of time show that as we age, our musical preferences become more stable, with them being relatively stable already in early adolescence. Thus, pay attention to the music that you listen to, for you might listen to it for a long time. Also, did you notice who influenced you when you chose your musical preferences? It seems that during childhood, we are less likely to make deliberate choices with regards to our musical preferences, being more keen to listen to whatever music is around us. Adolescence, it's a period when we are more strongly influenced by our peers, and there is evidence that sometimes adolescents listen to different musical genres just to fit in. Early adulthood is a period of further exploration as people go to college, and they explore a variety of musical preferences which further consolidate during adulthood. If you remember the music model from earlier, studies show that age influences this dimension. For example, in a study made by Bonneville-Rossi and colleagues with more than 240,000 participants with age range from 12 to 65, many relations were observed. Preferences from genres included the unpretentious and sophisticated dimension increased as people's age was higher. Preferences for mellow dimension was relatively stable, and preference for intense and contemporary dimensions gradually declined. The authors commented on the observation that preference for intense music genres was higher in adolescence and offered several explanations. The fact that music, which is characterized by loud and distorted sounds and with a lot of tension, is in line with the adolescents' strive to form their identity and their need for independence. But also, as we age, the tolerance for loud and distorted sounds reduces. Another interesting observation of these authors was the fact that the observed preference for sophisticated music, which is complex and higher in adulthood, a time when people are striving to establish their social status and career success. Another important aspect regarding individual characteristics is one's engagement with music. It seems that people who are more highly engaged with music show greater strength of preference for their preferred music genre. Again, we all know some people who know all the history of one musical genre as well as the main artist, bands, their albums historically, and lyrics from several musical pieces, and these people passionately talk about them when we meet, and of course they wouldn't really change their preferred music genre over time. To summarize, psychologists investigated the influence of certain personality traits, age, gender, and aspects regarding to one's engagement to music on musical preferences. Until now, we've learned about the music descriptors and the individual factors which have been investigated in relation to musical preferences. Have you ever thought about how different situations and context influence our musical preferences? Psychologists observed the fact that when people are in public places, such as at a festival or in a restaurant, they tend to tolerate a wider number of music genres. Thus, in the presence of the others, we tend to be more flexible in our attitudes as opposed to situations when we are at home and we have more control over our musical selections. Another interesting finding was the fact that people are influenced in their liked and disliked responses by the perceived fit of the music in a particular context. Thus, though we might not particularly like dance music, in a gym setting we might as well like it, for it energizes us and it's appropriated in that context. Also, people seem to have specific preferred music for different contexts. When we study, we might choose certain types of music, which might be very different from the ones that we prefer to listen to while doing physical exercise, for example, or house chores. Have you ever developed some specific musical preferences when being in the right context? At festivals, when we can have intense experiences with music, such as having fun with friends or falling in love, when certain band is playing, and further develop specific preferences for the music associated with those good vibes. Throughout this video, we split factors related to musical preferences in three broad categories. However, this is a didactic distinction, and in reality these categories influence each other, and for sure there are factors which are still to be considered in relation with musical preferences. All the studies we presented here highlight the complexity of this topic, and for now, a unified theory of the way musical preferences develop, or a theory which can specifically predict one's musical preference at a given point in time, is still in need to be developed.